You know, it's tough to ignore what's happening here in North Carolina with Hurricane Helen Wright. I mean, the flooding, the power outages, it's a mess. And it really makes you think about disaster response, especially with the election so close.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Right.
definitely top of mind for a lot of folks right now.
And I just got back from this town hall in Greensboro with Senator JD Vance,
Okay.
and he really zeroed in on this topic.
He's
It's
trying,
always,
yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting to hear from somebody who's more on that conservative side of things, how they view government's role in all of this.
Right, because it's such a crucial question right now, especially with, as you said, the election coming up and then this happening right beforehand. So
Yeah.
what did he have to say?
Well, one of the most, I would say, powerful moments was when a volunteer pilot actually named Adam,
Okay.
he spoke up.
Yeah.
And he had been flying supplies into Western North Carolina.
Okay.
And his biggest concern was that as the initial shock wears off, people are going to forget about Western North Carolina. They're not going to, the sense of urgency to help is going to disappear.
Which happens, sadly, so often.
And so he asked Senator Vance directly, what can be done to make sure that doesn't happen?
Oh, wow. And how did Senator Vance respond to that?
Well, he started by assuring Adam that he would not forget Western North Carolina
Okay.
and praised private citizens and organizations that stepped up to help.
Mhm.
But then he moved into, I would say, a pretty sharp criticism of the federal government's response, specifically calling out the delay in deploying the 82nd Airborne.
And that's one of the units that's like, for folks who don't know, they are one of the ones that's supposed to be able to be deployed very, very quickly, right?
Right, very mobile.
Mm-hmm.
And so he actually compared this to the 2010 Haiti earthquake,
Okay.
where he argued the 82nd Airborne was deployed much, much faster.
So he's drawing a parallel between those two events, but I imagine the logistics and challenges were probably pretty different in each situation now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point to consider. This comparison might make sense on an emotional level,
Right.
but there are a lot of factors at play, right? I mean, the scale of the disaster, available resources, even just like the political climate at the time.
And even domestically, right? How easy it is to move stuff within the United States versus having to go to a completely different country.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like, while his point about needing a swift response is definitely valid, it's important to make sure we're comparing apples to apples when we're thinking about these things.
Right, and making sure we have all the information.
Exactly.
So how does this all tie into Vance's larger stance on disaster relief? Like, what's the solution here?
Well, he seemed to be advocating for a more streamlined approach, one that kind of cuts through all the bureaucratic red tape. He wasn't so much focused on pointing fingers at, like, specific agencies
Okay.
or individuals.
She's not like FEMA messed up. It's more...
Right, not like that. Exactly.
Yeah.
He actually used this phrase, bureaucratic incompetence, that he thinks is hindering effective action.
Okay, so less red tape, more action.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
He thinks empowering people on the ground to be able to make decisions much more quickly and cut through all those layers of bureaucracy is crucial, especially in those early stages when time is so critical.
And he used a pretty interesting example to kind of drive this point home.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He talked about Elon Musk
Oh, wow.
and how even Musk, who Vance described as like a former center-left Democrat,
Interesting.
is now, in his words, pissed off
Right.
about government incompetence.
So by bringing up Musk, somebody who's generally seen as a problem solver and innovator, Vance is really tapping into a sentiment that I think resonates with a lot of voters, regardless of political affiliation.
Right.
It's that desire for a government that runs more efficiently and effectively.
It's funny because, I mean, he is a businessman himself, Vance. He's not a politician.
Right.
So
Good.
I think that does come through in how he speaks and how he views these things. It's interesting.
And, Elon Musk, love him or hate him, the guy does get things done.
Yeah, he definitely has that reputation. Yeah, and, I mean, this idea of draining the swamp, which has been used a lot in politics lately, I feel like it really does connect with people who are just fed up with government not working the way they want it to, especially during emergencies like this.
Right. And it wasn't just, he did criticize the system, but then he actually laid out what he would change.
Yeah, like, what were some of his ideas?
So one of his big things was accountability.
Okay.
He really thinks that this lack of accountability within the government, and he wasn't just talking about disaster relief, he sees this as a larger issue.
Yeah.
This is preventing the government from running effectively.
Okay.
Because if people don't face consequences for messing up, nothing's going to change.
And did he give any examples of what that would look like how you'd actually implement that?
Yeah, so he compared like Trump's leadership style, which you could say is maybe a little more aggressive.
To what he sees as the current administration's more maybe hands-off approach.
Interesting.
And his point was, to get things done and have that accountability, you have to be willing to call people out when they're not performing.
And how did that go over with the audience? I imagine that's a bit of a, a spicy take, right?
There were definitely some murmurs when he made that comparison.
Yeah.
But I think it was clear that his message was resonating with people who feel like nothing really changes,
Right, like the same mistakes get made over and over again.
Exactly.
And so it sounds like, to go back to your point about concrete changes, this wasn't just about disaster relief for Vance. It was about a whole bunch of other issues as well, right?
Yeah. He went on to talk about immigration, the economy, even Social Security.
Okay, so those big ticket items that always seem to come up.
Always. Let's start with immigration. What was Vance's stance there?
Well, he was very passionate about this topic. He really focused on the cost of illegal immigration, particularly the strain he sees it putting on things like housing, education.
Right.
And he also connected it to the fentanyl crisis.
Which, that's a huge issue right now.
Huge, yeah. And this is where he got kind of personal, too.
Oh, how so?
He mentioned how his family has been affected by addiction.
Wow.
So you could really feel that this wasn't just a political talking point for him.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was something that he had a personal connection to.
Right. I'm sure that resonated with a lot of people in that room.
Oh, absolutely. And it really kind of brings it home, right?
Mm.
Like, this isn't just an abstract issue. This is affecting real people, real families.
And what did he say needs to be done?
So his main point was that it's actually not that complicated. We need to enforce the immigration laws we already have.
So more about enforcement than new policies.
Right. He's saying we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to use the tools we already have.
Okay, interesting. So he tackled immigration. What about the economy? What were some of his concerns there?
So his big focus there was the rising cost of living.
Yeah, that's something everybody's feeling right now.
Right. And he really highlighted how much harder it is for young people to buy homes now, to start families.
Yeah, you can barely afford to, rent an apartment these days.
Exactly. It's tough out there.
Yeah.
And this is where he brought up energy independence.
Okay.
He even used that phrase, drill, baby, drill, which I'm sure you've heard.
Oh, yeah. That one definitely brings back some memories.
And that slogan's really interesting because it evokes such different reactions from people.
It's like a time capsule.
Right. For some people, it represents this idea of American strength and self-reliance, like we can take care of our own energy needs.
But for others, it probably raises concerns about climate change, the environment.
Exactly. It really highlights how differently people view this issue. But for Vance and his supporters, it seemed like it was about bringing back jobs, lowering costs.
And he tied that to this idea of companies moving jobs overseas.
Right. He criticized those policies, arguing that they're hurting American workers.
So again, prioritizing American interests.
Yeah, putting American workers first.
Got it. Okay. And what about Social Security? That's a huge one, especially for older voters.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people are concerned about its future.
Absolutely. What did he have to say about that?
Well, he actually addressed it head on. He called out what he said was misinformation spreading about Trump,
Okay.
saying that Trump would gut Social Security if he was reelected.
So he saw that as a real threat, something that he had to address.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was not letting that slide.
Interesting.
He said it was completely false.
Okay.
And he emphasized that Trump is committed to protecting Social Security
Okay.
and that he'd even cut taxes on Social Security income.
So he's trying to reassure those older voters that their benefits are safe with Trump.
Exactly. He wants them to feel confident that a vote for Trump isn't a vote against their benefits.
Did he go into specifics about those tax cuts, or was it more about pushing back on those negative claims?
It was more about reassurance, less about policy specifics in this case. He really wanted to draw that contrast between what he was framing as fear tactics from the other side
Yeah.
and what he presented as Trump's dedication to protecting this crucial program.
So a lot of ground covered in this town hall. It sounds like he really hit on those hot-button issues that we know are going to be central to this election.
Yeah, it really does seem like those kitchen table issues, as they say, the economy, those social safety net programs, they're really breaking through in a way we haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting how Vance brought it all back around to the hurricane. This town hall was just a couple of days afterwards, so people were already thinking about leadership during a crisis.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of leadership, Vance told this story about a phone call he had with Trump, and the timing was pretty wild.
Oh, really? What was that?
So he talked to Trump right after that second attempt on his life.
Oh, wow.
And you know what Trump was most upset about? That he didn't get to finish his golf game. Love him or hate him, that's classic Trump.
Yeah, that's exactly what Vance was getting at.
Like that image of strength in the face of anything, it's really something.
And Vance really played that up, this idea of Trump staying calm under pressure, especially compared to the current administration.
Right, using that anecdote to paint a very specific picture of Trump's leadership style.
Yeah, and he didn't stop there. He also criticized Vice President Harris for being too scripted, for dodging tough questions.
It's funny how much those perceptions of how someone handles themselves, how they come across, it really factors into these conversations about leadership.
For sure. So Vance is saying, we need a leader who's decisive, who takes charge.
Especially when you're talking about something like disaster response, where every second counts.
And I keep thinking back to Adam, that pilot, and what he said about people forgetting about Western North Carolina.
It's easy to get caught up in the political back and forth, but at the end of the day, it's people's lives that are at stake.
Exactly. And hearing these stories, these firsthand accounts, it just drives that home.
And that's what we always try to do with these deep dives. We want to give you all the angles so you can make your own informed decisions.
So as we get closer to November, it really does come down to this. How much do these different leadership styles matter to you?
Yeah. How do they factor into your decision when you walk into that voting booth? It's a big question.
It really is. And it's not just about the president. It's about all the candidates on the ballot.
Absolutely. Local, state, federal, they all make decisions that impact our lives.
Well said. Thanks for breaking all this down with me today.
Anytime. It's always a fascinating conversation.
And to all of you listening, keep asking those tough questions, keep digging for those different perspectives, and who knows, maybe you'll even feel inspired to try your hand at baking some treats with your family, just like Senator Vance.
There you go. A little less talk about draining the swamp and a little more time spent with loved ones. That's what I'm talking about.
I couldn't agree more. We'll be back next week with another deep dive, but until then, take care, everybody.